Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Mary Price. I'm the Events and Marketing Manager at the Shingo Institute at Utah State University. I'm pleased to have Lisa Riley and Adrian Healy with us today from the Manufacturing Institute. They've been a Shingo licensed affiliate since 2008, and they're based in the UK. If you haven't had a chance to read the article TMI wrote about the topic we're discussing today, I would encourage you to go to our website. It's shingo.org. Click the media tab and select the blog, and you'll find the article there. At the end of today's webinar, we'll have a very short Q&A session. Each of you have the ability to upvote a question by clicking on the thumbs up icon. You also have the ability to comment on each other's questions. We often run out of time and we're unable to answer all those questions, but we'll forward your information to TMI and they can follow up directly with you. And with that, Lisa, I'm going to turn the time over to you now to introduce our special guest for the day.
Thank you, Mary, for that really nice introduction. I appreciate it. My name is Lisa Riley. I'm the Executive Director at the Manufacturing Institute. We were established in Trafford Park, Greater Manchester in 1994 by an alliance of quite high-profile manufacturers from the area, including people like Rolls-Royce and obviously Kellogg's. And their aim was to improve knowledge, learning, understanding, collaboration within the sector, and that still holds true today. So, being a trading provider, we talk a lot at the Manufacturing Institute about what good looks like, and we benchmark the good, the bad and the ugly, but we maybe don't always articulate it as burnt out or burnout. So for example, a process or a strategy is burnt out, or even an old piece of equipment. So we recognise that there's nice alignment with the Shingo guiding principles. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Jackie Francis Walker, aka the UK Burnout Queen. Jackie's a registered psychotherapist, coach and writer and trainer. She's worked with thousands of successful professionals over a 25-year period and is regularly featured as an expert source in national and global press. And she's going to talk about what burnout looks like in an organisation. And if you're familiar with the Shingo guiding principles, you'll see the positive alignment and why the framework presents a perfect tool to banish burnout. Thank you. Over to you, Jackie.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Okay, so why the Shingo principles can help prevent organisational burnout. First, I want to show you the typical graphic, which is a stress curve. It's used a lot and it's a really helpful model for understanding how an increase in pressure on individuals across the whole company environment can affect their performance. If there's not enough pressure, then people will find themselves in the bore-out zone, which means they're demotivated, there's a lack of interest, and they basically switch off and tune out. The optimal zone for people to be working in is this green zone, where people are in their comfort zone with a moderate amount of pressure, or in their stretch zone where there's a higher amount of pressure but not too much. So in the stretch zone, people are perhaps having to work out something new, or they're trying to solve a problem they haven't come across before. They're curious, they're engaged, and there's excitement and a sense of achievement. So this is where we want to keep people as much as we can. If the pressure continues at too high a level, or for too long a period, or without people being able to take time to reboot and recharge, then they get pushed over into the strain zone, which is this yellow one here. And you can see how quickly performance drops off once people enter this particular zone. And if they're in the strain zone for too long, a certain period of time, then they will enter the burnout zone, at which it becomes very difficult to function effectively. And the reason for that is that the body produces a range of stress hormones. The adrenal glands produce them, and the body and the brain use them in managing the everyday challenges of their work. So if we use up those stress hormones quicker than the body can replenish them, then we start to go below critical mass in the adrenal reservoir, and then the body and the brain cannot operate in the way that it needs to, and we enter burnout. So for me, that's the main difference between stress and burnout. We no longer have a reservoir to help us bounce back. we have to fill it first. I love this particular zone up here, the Zone of Delusion, because it's quite common to come across people who enter into this or even operate out of this. Basically, the Zone of Delusion, and I've been in it too, is it says that sometimes we just feel so invincible, so on top of our game, that we don't believe that it's possible for us to enter burnout. And I'm sorry to say that, with a few exceptions, most of us have our breaking point when it comes to being in the strain zone, using up our adrenal reservoir, and there's not that many people who aren't actually susceptible to entering burnout. It is also possible for there to be a zone of delusion in some companies, unenlightened companies, where they believe that if you keep putting pressure on your employees, you can somehow stretch the stretch zone so they can keep producing more and more output. That isn't possible. That's not realistic. All you're going to do is push people into the strain zone and ultimately into burnout. So what does burnout look like in business? You can see on the right hand side there Professor Christina Maslach, who has researched and created the gold standard inventory, the Maslach Burnout Inventory, and it measures 3 dimensions in the development of burnout within business, within workers. The first dimension is a growing sense of ineffectiveness, where people find that they're taking longer to do the same tasks, or they're making more mistakes, they're less satisfied with the quality of what they're doing, or they even feel that what they're doing has lost meaning. The second dimension is cynicism, and this describes the typical process when people are stressed and burnt out, that they start to withdraw, they start to shut down, they lose access to their to their normal supports that keep them functioning, and they don't reach out for help. Instead, they're more likely to be cynical about the chances of things changing for the better, and they get stuck into a bit of a rabbit in the headlights place. The third dimension is exhaustion, and with burnout, because of the depletion of the adrenal reservoir, there is a prevailing sense of exhaustion. No matter how much rest you get, no matter how much sleep you get, the body is exhausted and the brain is exhausted. So the MBI can measure people against those 3 dimensions and can be a very helpful indicator of where they are with burnout. Some facts which came out of the Gallup report in 2018 and also in 2020. 76% of people experience burnout at least sometimes. Now, I think that is an astonishingly high number of people to report burnout. 63% of burnt out employees are more likely to take a sick day, and they're more likely, 2.6 times as more likely, to leave the company altogether. That clearly has a huge impact on any organisation's bottom line, but also it's going to have a huge impact upon the culture within the organisation and the sense of well-being as a whole throughout individuals, teams and the organisation. Now, the 2 lower statistics are probably less easy to spot. You can probably measure the first 3, but the 2 lower ones, they're better measured by something like the MBI, because 13% of people report having lower confidence in their performance. That'll be the effectiveness dimension. And 50%, which is again a stunning number, are less likely to discuss with their manager how they can approach reaching their performance goals. They are also less likely to say, I'm struggling, I need help. And that is that's going to be the cynicism dimension, where people shut down and step back and switch off. So if a manager isn't able to spot that people have got less confidence and that they're closing down about the fact that they might be struggling with their performance goals, that again could have quite an impact on the organisation as well as the output. A couple of quotes here. Employee burnout can trigger a downward spiral in individual and organisational performance. So what Gallup is saying is, don't only look to the individual. It's not just their problem. It affects the organisation too. So the organisation needs to have a stake in it. And the Stanford Social Innovation Review has saying, instead of pressuring already stressed individuals to fix themselves, true wellness requires organisation level interventions. So again, the organisation has a stake in it. Now, Gallup, when they did their review, they found that 5 factors came to the top where employees were saying these are the things that would make the most difference to us in terms of reducing our sense of burnout. So these are really important for leaders to focus on. And it's unfair treatment, an unmanageable workload, a lack of role clarity, a lack of communication and support, and unreasonable time pressure. If you can fix these, then you're probably well on the way to a healthier organisation. So if we now go over to the Shingo guiding principles, which I think provides a really good framework for addressing burnout in an organisation. The 8 principles are to respect every individual, to lead with humility, seek perfection, embrace scientific thinking, focus on process, assure quality at the source, improve flow and pull, and to think systemically. And we're going to look at a couple of those in the rest of the presentation. When I map the 5 factors that Gallup came out with over to the Shingo principles, you can see that there's 4 of the principles that are particularly coming out as being the leading ones to focus on for these, and that's respecting people, leading with humility, focusing on process, and seeking perfection. So let's go over to leading with humility, one of the Shingo guiding principles. And it's been called the linchpin to preventing burnout. It's actually really important, and it can affect the entire company culture. And I'm sure it's no surprise that leading practitioners of enterprise excellence, they do this automatically. They know how to do it, or they instinctively know how to do it, or they've learned how to do it through Shingo. So what does it look like, leading with humility? Well, the first thing I need to say is leaders are there, the senior team are there in order to provide a vision for the whole of the organisation, and that's really crucial. And one of the visions that you can provide is about the concept of leading with humility, because everyone at every level can adopt this particular behaviour. But it's really important that the senior team not only shares the vision about humility in action, but they actually walk their talk and do it themselves too. That's the way to get it embedded across the whole of the organisation's culture. So what we mean by leading with humility is the leader's willingness not only to have a clear view themselves of where they want the company to go and what they want to do to get there, but also to be willing to seek input from other people in the company, to listen carefully, and to continuously learn. So they don't necessarily always know what is the best way forwards, but they might get that input if they are willing to listen to people at the different levels in the company. Now, what this does is it creates an environment where the associates can feel respected and energised, and to give freely of their creative abilities. It creates the right company culture within which the organisation can thrive, and burnout or the possibility of burnout is reduced. It's also really helpful to encourage employees to report issues and ideas, and for them to be confident that that will be met with a positive response. Then they've got a stake in the company, they feel valued, they feel there is a point to actually taking the trouble to let people know if something's not working well. It's probably really helpful to say to those of you in the senior team, please be aware that people handle pressure differently. You rise to the senior team by virtue of your attributes, your capacity for resilience, robustness, and mental toughness, so you can take the decisions that need to be taken for the organisation, and you can thrive on the pressure and the challenge that it brings. But people at different levels of the company won't necessarily have those same traits or to the same extent as yourself. They also have less control in their working day. So again, research has found that the top dog has less stress as measured by baseline cortisol. Cortisol being one of the stress hormones that the body produces. So even though they might be under hugely greater pressure or challenge, they don't get as stressed by it. And the other finding is that the less control you have, the more stressed you're likely to be. So again, people in the senior team, they're more likely to have a huge amount of control over what they do and the way they do it. Whereas at the bottom of the organisation, the people doing the day-to-day work, they probably have a lot less control over what they do, how much they do, the way in which they do it. So it's easier for them to become stressed through that lack of control. The interesting thing is, it's the people in the middle managers, who often will report the most stress, and that's because they're trying to satisfy too many masters. They've got to look after their own well-being and their own performance, but they're also trying to make sure that what's given down to them from the senior team actually is delivered, and at the same time they're having to care for their team, their workforce, who and look after their well-being, whilst at the same time trying to encourage them to rise to meeting the performance targets. Sometimes all of those different aspects are very difficult to square in one place. So why does leading with humility reduce burnout? As I said, it increases people's sense of control and of being valued and supported. This reduces their sense of stress. Interestingly, it reduces their resistance to new ideas, and it can loosen their bias about what they think are better ways of working. So it makes it easier for the organisation to introduce new ideas and to change processes so that they work better. It reduces cortisol production in the individual. Again, that reduces stress, and it helps employees stay in the comfort and stretch range of the stress curve that we saw at the beginning. Very quick aside about cortisol, fantastic chemical that the body uses for a wide range of functions, most of them really good functions, useful. It's essential for us to perform during the day, but too much of it reduces our performance and our well-being. And as you can see from the diagram, it actually has a physical effect on the body, so it can weaken the immune system, it can affect our heart, high blood pressure, cause high blood sugar, which leads to diabetes, it can cause digestive issues, nerve problems, anxiety, depression, headaches, you name it. Cortisol is not good to have in too much quantity in the body. So the second Shingo principle that I like to focus on is focusing on process. All outcomes are the consequence of a process, whether it's a formal process or an informal process where someone does A and then B and then they try C, and that leads to D. That too is a process. And even good people cannot consistently produce ideal results if they're working with a poor process. And when something goes wrong, the issue is often rooted in an imperfect process rather than imperfect people. And back when I used to work in industry, we used to invoice one of our customers each month for 25 of their remote sites. And what it meant is that the invoice had to pass through 25 pairs of hands before it could be signed off for payment. Clearly not a great process. So I got the invoice broken up into 25, a single invoice for each of the 25 sites. The invoices went through one pair of hands, passed through for payment, and the process worked quicker and much more effectively for both the customer and for my own employer. So ideal behaviour: when an error occurs, focus on improving the process that created the error. We may also need to see if the individual needs some training or support, but first let's get the process right, because that gives the structure within which everyone has better chance to create good results. And speaking of processes, it's really useful to create a safe process for workers to flag up concerns. So this is similar to leading with humility, creating a safe place for people to communicate upwards. The process needs to be safe so that they can do it without concern about any retribution or any to know that their feedback is taken seriously, that their career won't be affected by actually saying something that might be not known, and that they feel that the company is working with them to find solutions, or at least they have confidence the company will at least consider it strongly to have a look and see if there's any solutions to what they've reported. So why does focusing on process reduce burnout? Well, burnout itself is a process. It's a gradual process. And typically people need to be, or will have been, in the strain zone for something like 6 to 18 months before burnout develops, before they cross over into the burnout zone. So that means there's a huge window for intervention within the organisation to head it off. And usually once people become burnt out, it can take them at least 2 months and anything up to 9 to 12 months to recover. And usually that's when they come and see someone like myself in order to work specifically with it, because working with burnout is a very unique thing. It's not the same as working with stress. You can easily get it wrong. And just thinking about processes within the organisation, we can certainly look at addressing the factors in individuals that lead to them being more susceptible to burnout. That's really helpful. And some employers will bring in well-being services like counselling or mindfulness or yoga or a gym or something along those lines. That's all really, really helpful. It's providing a very supportive company culture by doing that. Be aware, though, that people can feel it's a bit stigmatising in order to admit to being burnt out. So that's something where the company culture perhaps can be helpful in taking that stigma away. One caveat: if the organisation or the processes in the organisation aren't aligned to relieving burnout, or if they have become a cause of burnout in themselves, then obviously there's a limit to what you can do in working with individuals on burnout. You actually need to address the organisational issues too. Clearly it's going to take a lot of time and input in order to change an entire organisational culture. Fortunately, the Shingo principles give a really good grounding in what to do in order to help do that. But perhaps the quickest input is at team level, because you can take some action quickly, you can do something informally, test out various things to see what actually is going to work better, and deliver some quick wins to improve the process and the team well-being. So I would say team level is definitely a place to look first, and also what do individuals need. So I believe that's the end of my presentation. Yes, it is. So we're going to do some Q&A now, which I think Mary will handle. But if you want some further information about Shingo within your organisation, then do feel free to contact Adrian. And anything about burnout coaching and consultancy, do feel free to approach myself. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jackie. That was excellent. We do have a few questions right now. The first question we have has 2 parts to it, and I'll direct this towards you, Jackie. It says, in the future, do you see workplace burnout being treated as a health and safety hazard in the workplace in the same way as a physical safety hazard? The second part of that question is how would this change the way that organizations work to reduce that hazard?
Brilliant question. I would say it's already treated as a hazard in the workplace, certainly in the UK. I'm not sure about other countries, but in the UK there's a whole directive about stress at work and the sort of steps that companies are expected to go to in order to make sure that the employees aren't subjected to stress which will then be harmful to their well-being. So I would say it's already there. There's already a body of frameworks there. There's an act there which covers it. And in fact, there's even been legal cases where companies have been prosecuted because an employee went off with stress and burnout, and then they returned to their job later and there was nothing changed about the job at all. And so the employer was basically put straight back into the very environment that caused the stress in the first place and caused them to go off with stress. So they were prosecuted for that because they had a duty of care. They could knowingly predict that by putting someone back into the same environment, the same result was going to happen. So this is where Shingo is going to be brilliant, because it looks at actually improving the company environment, which is what's needed in that particular case.
So our next question is, how can a senior leader proactively identify that a team member is going through a burnout before it starts to affect them and it's visibly clear?
Again, that's really, really important. I would certainly be keeping an eye out to see if people start to come off the top of their work game, because they start to not be as energized, not be as energetic, and small errors start to creep in, which is quite obvious. But you might consider using some an assessment inventory. So MBI is one. I'm not sure Shingo has one that it can offer, but there's a number out there which you can take a reading of across the organisation in order to find out where burnout is happening. And I think also it's about conversations. Leading with humility, being open to having a conversation with people and just checking in. How's it going?
You've also got some classic root cause analysis in there.
Thank you. So,
to get to the bottom of things.
And I think the other thing is that if you've got some kind of coaching provision for the senior team, then that's also could be an early warning sign, because that may be where they first start to recognise it or be alerted to it, and then encouraged to do something about it.
Wonderful. Great. I think that's all the questions we have. Lisa, Adrian, do you want to add anything before we say goodbye?
No, I think that I think around about 2019, the WHO recognised, the World Health Organization recognised burnout as an occupational phenomenon. And they're keen to point out that it is not a medical diagnosis, it is an experience. So I think it's really interesting to see, obviously, that around 2019, something else hoved into our existence, COVID, which probably slowed the momentum around what the World Health Organization were doing around the causes of burnout. But certainly we're seeing a lot more conversation around it, definitely, and in terms of process and process improvement and continuous improvement, and definitely with our Shingo clients.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks to all the attendees. I hope that it was valuable to you. And we'll see you next month for our next webinar. Thanks again.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for dialing in. Bye now.
Bye-bye.